properties and methods. It cannot contain variables and functions. So that is the reason the difference is, you should know that in many interviews they ask this question. So what is difference? What is difference between? So between a variable and property. What is difference between variable and property? Because data is stored in properties, and data is stored in properties and variable also. It is stored in properties and variable. Then what is difference between variable and property? That is the key point we need to understand. Difference between the variable and property we need to know. So the key point, the difference between variable and property is actually, so see, already I told you, here I am creating a class called a demo. In this class, we cannot declare a variable. Variables are not allowed. We can declare variable outside the class. So var some x equal to 10. So suppose I defined here name is equal to TV, something like this. And inside the class, we have to define property like price. Price is equal to some 45,000. So outside the class, data is in variable. Inside the class, it is in property. So what is difference between variable and property? Actually, the difference between variable and property is actually variable. Variable is immutable. Immutable means it cannot change. It cannot change. It cannot change its technically, it cannot change its size. It cannot change its size dynamically. It cannot change its size dynamically. It cannot change its size dynamically. So that means it is immutable. It cannot change dynamically. You can simply say that it cannot change dynamically, According to the situation, according to the state, it cannot change dynamically. It will have a constant fixed range of value. So the value range cannot change dynamically. For variables, they can't change dynamically. But property is mutable. Properties are mutable. That means they can change dynamically according to the situation, according to the requirement. They can change dynamically. A property can dynamically handle the situation. According to the situation, it can change its size, its behavior. It can change. Properties can change dynamically. So variables cannot do that. So in a class, you cannot have a variable, because class must provide only the options that can change dynamically. So class can provide only the options that can change dynamically. So that is the reason. Technically, so you cannot have a variable in a class. You can have only a property in the class. We can have a property in the class. So difference between property and variable. Variable is static and property is dynamic. Both are used for storing the data, but variable is dynamic. You can technically say that variable are immutable. And here the properties are mutable. That is the difference between variable and properties. Configuring difference between the variable and properties. So usually when you are dealing with variables and properties, you should know this approach, right? That is one difference. And I will show you more points here. Practically, I will show you more point. Actually, so variable don't have, variables cannot have authentication. So cannot have authorization. That means anyone can set the value, get the value from the variable. But properties have more control. Properties have more control. That means property can have authorization. That means you can restrict the values according to the situation. You can restrict the values according to the situation. You can restrict the values according to the situation. That means, for example, you declared a variable. Into this variable, anyone can store the data and anyone can access the data. Anyone can store and access the data. But if you define a property that you can restrict, for certain users, this property will allow to store data. For certain users, it will not allow to store data. That means it will change its behavior according to the situation, according to the state and situation. Variable cannot do that. So that is the important difference. That is the important difference. So that is the key point that you need to understand the difference between variable and properties. I will show you how properties have more control than variables. We will see one simple example. We will see a basic example how they have more control. So let's take one simple example for that. So that means to understand that the variables and the properties, they have authorization related points. That means we have more control over the properties. Okay, let's see. So let's see. So for that, we will create one simple example. Let's create a simple class. Means to understand. That means actually the properties can have more control. So by using actually accessors, we generally call that as accessors. By using accessors, they have more control. They have more control over that. So we call them as accessor. Accessor provides more control over the properties. So restricted access over the properties, right? Let's see so how it actually happens. Means how the properties are defined and configured and used. Okay, let's create one simple example, one simple option here. So I'm creating a class. So let's define a class here. Yeah, I'm creating a class. So a class. So the class name, I created the class name some demo. So we are defining the class demo. Okay. So demo is the class. Now above the class, we are declaring some variables. So username is equal to some username. Okay. And some username. Okay. And password is equal to some password. Some John12 or some password like some admin. That is the password. Now in this class, we are declaring a property. We are configuring one property. So property, I am giving underscore name, product name, underscore product name. And this underscore product name is equal to having some value, or it is just a property empty. That means it is not having anything. Just we configured just underscore product name. Now important is into this product name property. So I should not allow everyone to set value. I should not allow everyone to set value. I must allow only certain restricted users to set the value. I don't want to everyone to set the value into it, right? So in that case, then how you can restrict, how you can configure and how you can restrict actually. So we can configure and we can restrict. So by using, so technically we can restrict by using accessors. How do we define accessors? Actually, so what we are doing is we are using a get accessor. This is get, and I define the name as product name. Remember, this is written. This is an accessor. This is an accessor. Get is an accessor. Get accessor is used to accessor its name. Remember, it is written like a method, but actually it is referring to a property. That means we have to access as a property because it is allocating memory actually. Now what this get accessor will do is, going to do is, this get accessor should return the product name. That means underscore product name. It should return underscore product name. Just like object I told you, the members in the class are accessible. The members in the class are accessible within the class by using this keyword. Just like object, already I told you. In object, the members of an object are accessible within the object by using this keyword. The members outside the class are accessible by using an object of the class. So here, so we have an accessor. This accessor is returning the product name variable. That means product name is a property which returns, it is an accessor which returns the value of this particular product name. Okay. Now we need an accessor to set the value. We need an accessor for setting the value. And to set the value, I am writing set product name. That is the property. It will take a new name. And what it will do is, it will set the new name. Into this product name. That means this dot underscore product name is equal to whatever the new name they have passed. But I don't want everyone to set the name. I don't want everyone to set the name. I want to restrict people. For example, we will ask the username and password. We will ask to enter. By using prompt, I will ask. So enter username. Okay. By using prompt, I will ask enter password. Okay. After entering username and password, verify that username and password. If username is equal to John and password password is equal to some admin. If it is matching, then only I want to set this product name. If it is not matching, else, if it is not matching, then I will display a message. So message document dot write. We will display a message error, and we will say that. So you are not authorized to set product name. That message we will display. You are not authorized to set product. So that is one option we have defined. That means what is difference between variable and property? In a variable, anybody can set value. Anybody can get the value. There is no restriction. But for property, we can set restriction. Now everyone cannot set value into this product name property. It depends on whether the username and password is matching or not. So we have a class, and this class is configured. This class is configured with a product name property, and we are setting restriction for that property in such a way that everyone cannot set the value. Okay, now below this, we are writing the logic here. That means we will create var, so TV is equal to some new product. TV is equal to new demo. That is the class. We are creating an object for this class. Or I will reasonably give this class name as product. So we will create an object for the product class. We are creating an object for the product class. Product is the class. For the product class, we are creating an object. Through that, we are accessing product name. That means TV dot we can access the product name is equal to, I am defining Samsung TV. Now very important is this is nothing but this is setter. You are setting a value, and after setting the value we need to display the value. But remember, it will not allow to set the value Samsung TV. Allow to set the value Samsung TV if username and password is not matching. If username and password are not matching, it will not allow to set the value. If it is matching, it will set the value. After setting value, we will display. So we will write a condition. If TV.product name means if there is product name having a value, remember it will return undefined if there is no value. So if it is having a value, that means it is not undefined. If it is not undefined, then document.write, we will print that message name is equal to. So we will print TV dot product name. This is the getter. By using the getter, we are accessing the product name and we are displaying that product name. Now, what is this logic that we have written? The logic is nothing but, so when user opens the page, it will ask to enter password, user ID and password. When user enters the user ID and password, it will verify is that user ID and password matching or not. If it is matching, then only it will set the value. If it is not matching, then it will display error message. So generally, variables don't have such fine control over the properties. That is the reason properties are more having control. They are more secured than variables. So they can change their state and behavior according to situation. You will see that. Now put this in the home page. In the home page, we are just keeping that product.js link that script file. We are maintaining in a separate script file. So all this code, and we are linking that in home HTML. Now let's run home HTML page. Now when you start home HTML, it will ask username. I'm entering username. So John, okay. It is asking password. I went wrong. Something wrong password I entered. Then click OK. Then it says you are not authorized to set product name. That means it is restricting you to set the product name and you cannot access it. So now, for example, I will refresh. Username is John and password is admin. Okay. Now you can see that it says product name is set. You can also take the product name. For example, here I can also take the product name. I will say var product name. So prod name is equal to, this is also prompt, enter product name. So, and this name, prod name, we will set here. So that means we are taking the new name and displaying the new name. Instead of taking the new name and displaying the new name, what we can do is we can apply that from that prod name, whatever value is coming. That means here, tv.product name, you are setting some standard value. You can get from prod name. We can get from prod name. So that means we have designed another option here. Let's cancel this and see. So that means, yeah. Okay, now you see, enter username. So John. Enter password, some wrong password, and product name. So Nike Casuals, and it says that you cannot set it. Okay, I entered username John, password is admin, and I said Nike Casuals, and it sets it. So that means you can set the product name, a new name. So suppose I said so John, and I said some admin, and the product name as LG Mobile, and it gets. If you miss anything like username or password is not matching, so that means I entered some username wrong and password admin. So admin, both should match, and the product name is some Samsung TV, and it says you are not authorized to set the product name because something wrong there. So what is difference between a property and a variable? Variables don't have an authorized control. Anyone can access the variable and anyone can use the variable. Property is not like that. Property is not like that. So property have a restriction. Property have a restriction. That means the properties can be restricted. So they can change the behavior. Remember, many times, so one option is like sometimes in some technology, if you don't want to set a value, you can put read only. But when you put read only, then everyone cannot set the value. So everyone cannot set the value. If you set read only, then everyone cannot set the value. But accessor will change its behavior. For certain users, it will set the value. For certain users, it will not allow to set the value. That means it can change its behavior according to the situation. So that is why the properties are dynamic. They are mutable. They can change according to the situation. Variables cannot do that. And how you can change the behavior of property by using accessors. By using accessors, you can change the behavior. And in JavaScript, accessors are created by using get and set methods. So this is one example. This is one example of accessors, how we can use the accessors and work with the accessors. So this is one example I will copy. So remember, in this example we created, product.js. We created product.js, a JavaScript file. And in the JavaScript file, first we have all this code defined in the JavaScript file. And we have to integrate this into HTML page. Home HTML page, we are just adding that script. So to test it in the UI. So you can write everything in the single file. Just I showed you the difference here, how it manages. So technically, a class comprises of three things you have seen. A class contains property, and a class contains accessor. Two things we have seen. Now class comprises of methods and constructors. A class comprises of method and constructor. Now you need to understand the difference between method and constructor. What is difference between method, constructor, and function also. So another important question is, class already told you, class cannot contain function. So class can contain only. It cannot contain function. Class cannot contain function. Class can contain only. Technically, it can contain only method. So method means no function. It can contain method. It can contain method, not function. Now, obviously, the question is asked: what is difference between function and method? Function and method. So that is another point. What is difference between a function and method? You can see. Let's create one example. Another file I will add here. So methods.html. Okay, let's create a script file here. So script. Okay, and we are creating a class demo. Inside the class, you cannot have a function. So function cannot be there inside a class. Functions are not allowed. Now functions are allowed outside the class. That means here we have a function, and this function is hello. So here we have message document.write. So hello oop, something like this. Now you can access that function and use that function inside. Access and use the function inside the class. But you cannot create a function inside the class. Inside the class, you can have a method. So the functionality is defined in methods. Same, outside the class, the functionality is defined in function. Then what is difference between a function and a method? Function and a method. What is difference? So actually, technically speaking, so you have in computer programming, usually we have functions, we have methods, we have procedure. So technically speaking, the methods are called as subroutines. It is very high level language. That means at a high level, we call methods as subroutines. This type of term you will not hear from a basic learner or general basic level experienced people. If anybody is calling as method as a subroutine, that means very expert in programming uses that word subroutine actually. Technically, difference between a function and a method and a procedure actually. Function always intended to return a value. That means functions are always intended to build expression. You can use functions for building expression which returns a value. Functions are designed for building expressions, for returning the values. Method will not return value, will not return value. Methods are not returning value. But actually, in JavaScript, so methods have both behaviors. That means it can return value, so it can be without returning value. So methods are not good. Methods are not good for expression. So methods are not good for building expressions. Functions are good for expression. So methods are not good for building expressions. If you want to build an expression, which I will show you, to build an expression, better go with function. But you cannot build expression in a class because functions cannot be defined in a class. Functions cannot be defined in a class. Functions cannot be configured in a class. So functions can be defined, functions can be configured only outside the class, cannot be defined inside the class. One second. Okay. So technically function is intended to return value. Method is not intended to return a value. So it's not good for building expressions method. Procedure actually can have both behavior, behaviors. That means procedure can work as a function and can work as a method. That means it have both behaviors. So, but we don't have procedures in JavaScript. So we have functions and methods. Procedures have, that means according to situation, they will work. At one situation, they will return value. Another situation, they will not return value. That means it has the behavior of both of them. That's the reason you observe. You will hear this procedure in your database programming. In database programming, you might have heard about stored procedure. Am I right? You might have heard about stored procedure in database programming. That means you have seen that stored procedure, right? But I think majority of you may not know why it is called as a procedure. But you might have used a stored procedure, but you haven't learned, you might have not learned about why it is called stored procedure. Everywhere in any database programming, so you will have stored procedures. Am I right? Stored procedures. But very few people know why it is called as a procedure. Why they are called procedure. Why don't you call as stored method? Why don't you call as a stored function? Why you call as a stored procedure? What is the meaning of procedure? Actually, suppose you are creating, suppose we are creating, create procedure. We are creating a stored procedure, get products. In that, we are writing, so in the get product, we are writing a command. So like here, select star from TBL products. So that is the TBL products. That is the command we written inside it. Now tell me, if there are no tables, no records in the table, if there are no records in the table, will this get product show any error when I execute? When I execute this stored procedure and there are no records in the table, will it show any error saying that null? What do you say? Will it return any null exception if there are no records? If there are no records in table, is it going to return null error? Is it going to return null exception? Is it going to return null exception? Obviously, it will not return any null exception. Once check if you know database. Am I right? If I run the command select from table and table doesn't contain any records, will it return any error, null error? Will it return any null error? It will not return any null error. Am I right? Right. So that means it will not return anything. It will not return anything. Am I right? It will not return anything. If there are records, then it will return the records. Am I right? That means it is returning a value and it is not returning the value according to the situation. So this have the behavior of a function and the methods. So that is the reason we call this, technically we call this as method. Procedures. One second. Yeah. So it has the behavior of both function and method. That is the reason we call this as, technically we call this as procedure. We call this as procedure. So that is the difference between function, method and procedure. And the functions are good for expression, so which returns value. Methods are good for subroutines. That means a subroutine contains some set of statements to execute and return some returns some functionality, not return some value. It returns some functionality. So in JavaScript, you will not find any procedures. In JavaScript, you will find functions and methods. Class contains methods and module contains functions. Module contain functions. That means now if I want to access this function that I created, access that function I created inside this method, you can simply access that function hello. It will return that value. Actually, so we define like this. For example, we are writing a function. So called add. This function will take a and b and it will return a plus b. That means we return a function and we built an expression which returns addition. Now this print method inside the class, so it is using document.write addition, and it should access that add function and use it. This add function is executing this statement and it is returning the result of that particular, and add is expecting the values. It is expecting the values. So we will pass temporarily 10, 20 because it has to return the result of those two. Now I will create an object for this class. So that means where obj is equal to new demo. We are creating an object for that class. So that means an object is created for the class demo. So new will load that class into memory and its members are accessible with the reference of obj. Through obj, I am accessing print method. We are accessing the print method. And you can run this and see. So it returns the addition and it will display that addition there. So it is handling that situation. It is handling the configuration and defining. You can use any kind of values here. Suppose you can take the values from the user, you can perform addition on that and you can return the values. So that means later we will see complex program also. So complex programs also. But this is the basic approach. This is the basic approach how we can handle. So technically, so how to manage? How do we manage how we actually manage the function and methods. Functions use for building an expression, and you can access and use the function inside the class. Remember, class will not allow to create a function inside. Class will not allow to create a function inside, but it will allow to access the function and use the function. It will allow to access and use the functions. It will not allow to create. So class can contain only the methods. Class can contain only the methods. You can deal with only the methods. Class can contain the methods. So technically, what is difference between a function and a method? Function is intended to return a value. It is used for building expression. And methods are intended to design subroutines which will not return a value. So they are not good for expression, but they comprises of a set of statements to execute, and handle specific functionality, So that is the difference between function and method. So class cannot have functions. So class can have only methods. But one more important. So here, class can contain. What is difference between method and constructor? So actually, in a class can contain a constructor. Constructor also can define some functionality, can configure some functionality. Generally, when we ask what is a constructor, immediately many times learners will give you an answer like constructor is used for initializing value. That is wrong. Wrong means that is not only the work of constructor. So don't ever say that constructor is for initializing the value. That is not initializing the value. Constructor is for initializing the memory, not value. Many times we hear that people saying constructor is used for initializing values, which is a complete wrong statement. Constructor is not initializing value, it is initializing memory. So what happens in this initialized memory? The actions will execute automatically. So that means generally constructor is a special type of subroutine that executes automatically when memory is allocated for class. That executes automatically when memory is allocated for class. Constructor is a special type of subroutine that execute automatically when memory is allocated for the class. That means you don't need to call constructor. Constructor will execute automatically. I will show you in JavaScript how you define the constructor, how you configure the constructor. Let's see. For example, here I will create another option to show you what happens here. This is general methods and all. Example already there in your notes I will upload. So here we are creating a class database. Database is the class. In the database class, we have insert method, and it says document.write record inserted. The method record inserted. We have delete method, and it says document.write record deleted. But important, we are calling that, we are creating an object. So Oracle is equal to new database. Okay, remember, I am not using any parenthesis here. Just I am using new database. That means the memory is allocated for this class. Into the class, you see a constructor is loaded. A constructor is loaded. So the memory is allocated, into that a constructor is loaded, but currently we don't have any constructor defined. So by default, an empty constructor is present internally. We don't have any constructor defined. Okay, now I am accessing Oracle. So through Oracle, I am accessing Oracle. I am accessing insert. Through Oracle, I am accessing insert. And when I run this, you can see that it says record inserted. But before inserting or before deleting, I need to connect with the database first. That means I need connection first. Before inserting, before deleting, I need connection. First, I need a connection. Before inserting or deleting, I need a connection. Then generally, what I do is I return a method for connection. For connection, I return a method. And I'm saying document.write connected, connected. And after that, some record inserted or deleted. But the problem here is I'm not calling that method. If you don't call the method, that method will not execute. That means every method you need to call explicitly. But I want this functionality to happen automatically every time. That means I don't want to call it. I want it to happen automatically every time. That means I want the function to execute automatically. I want the function to execute automatically. Then in that case, if you give to a method, you have to manually access it. In that case, you can give this method to a constructor. You can give it to a constructor. In JavaScript, constructor is created by using the word constructor. And it is anonymous function. Anonymous means it should not have a name. Generally, in other programming languages, class name is given for constructor name, but not here. It should use the word constructor. It should use the word constructor. It should use the word constructor. And constructor don't have a name. Constructor don't have a name. Now, constructor is defined with some functionality. Now, what is the specialty? Constructor, you don't need to call anywhere. And you can see that automatically constructor executes for every class, for every object. Constructor contains some set of functionality that performed automatically whenever the class is loaded into memory. That means it initializes memory where some actions are executed automatically. So don't say that constructor is for initializing values. Constructor is not for initializing the values, it is for initializing the memory. What is the purpose of initializing the memory? The purpose of initializing memory is nothing but so that memory can have a functionality that it can execute automatically whenever object is created. Whenever object is created. But very important is constructor can execute only once per object. A constructor can execute only once per object. Constructor can execute only once per object. Suppose I am accessing Oracle.delete. Now here connected will not work two times. It will be only one time. Record inserted, record deleted. Just for clarity, I will put a break. So record inserted and record deleted. But connected is only one. That means constructor will execute only once per an object. It will execute only once per an object. So here, if you create another object, then it will execute the constructor again. Another important point, you might have seen in several programming languages, when you create an object for a class, then usually we use a parenthesis for class name. Actually, that is not required. So why? Because Actually, why that is used, that is not required also. Without that, it is working currently. Why that is required? Why this empty parenthesis is used actually? Empty parenthesis is nothing but, generally, constructor is an anonymous function. Constructor is an anonymous function. That means it is not having any name. If any function is not having a name, that function is accessed by using empty parenthesis. Empty parenthesis. So that indicates that it is a anonymous function. Anonymous function. I will show you. For example, observe here. I am writing here. I am writing here a function, and function is defined with document.write. So anonymous function, written like anonymous function. I will save this. This function is not having a name. That means it is missing the name. Identifier is missing. But no worry. I will enclose this function in a parenthesis. Now this is okay. It is okay. We have a function, but that function is not executed. To execute the function, we have to use an empty parenthesis. This is calling an anonymous function. This is calling an anonymous function. Anonymous functions are the functions that don't have name. And anonymous functions are called by using this empty parenthesis. And you can see that that function executes here. That function executes here. So you have to define this immediately after this. That is the reason generally whenever you create a class, demo, in that class you have a constructor. Constructor is anonymous. That's the reason what happens is when we create an object, let obj is equal to new demo, and we use an empty parenthesis. Now the question is, it is a class name. Why you are writing like a method? We are not writing like a method. We are writing like a class only. But after the class, we are mentioning about the constructor. Don't think that demo is written like a method. After the class name, we are mentioning a constructor. Constructor is an anonymous function. That means it is called auto. Even you don't define this, it will be called. Even you don't define this, it will be called. No problem, it will be called. So then why you define this? When you define this, when constructor is expecting some parameters, you can define. For example, this constructor is expecting some parameter, some name it is expecting. And you are printing document.write. So we said hello, and here I want to print that name. Now constructor is expecting some parameter. If you don't pass the parameter into constructor, then what will happen? If you don't pass parameter into the constructor, then what will happen? You can see it returns undefined. Then you have to pass the parameter into constructor. At that time, you mention about the constructor and pass a value into the constructor. Then it will access and it will use that value. That is the reason why we need this. In our JavaScript, mentioning about the constructor for the class name is not mandatory until or unless the constructor is expecting some parameters. If constructor is not expecting parameters, there is no necessity of configuring it. So if it is expecting parameters, then you have to define, right? So what is difference between a constructor and a method? Methods needs an explicit calling. Constructors will execute implicitly. They are same like methods. All the behavior will be same like a method. Only the point is they will execute automatically for every class object. Automatically they will execute. You don't need to define it manually. That is the intention of the constructor, configuring the constructor. Now we have a lot of points about constructor, like single parameter, multiple parameter, array parameter, constructor and method related. So many points are there that we will discuss in our next session, right? So tomorrow we will see what is constructor related properties and methods and constructor related parameters, different types of options used with constructor and methods, right? Tomorrow we'll continue with this. Okay, once we're done with this, we have to learn two more sessions. We will finish our JavaScript and we will go into jQuery. Now we will start working and interacting with the jQuery. So now jQuery and other options will be easy for us after understanding this. So tomorrow we will continue with this.